All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. It's good to see everyone in the room today. Big event today. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I imagine some people might be discovering the Stoa for the first time. I don't really know how to describe the Stoa really. Sort of this underground philosophical community that has sort of a zero fucks marketing vibe about it. We've been called the Burning Man of the internet, which I quite like. We launched around when COVID first came online, and we hosted well over 1,000 events since. And one thing that we've been known for is having conversations that simply you won't find anywhere else. And one of those conversations is happening today. We have our friend Noam Chomsky returning to the Stoa, and he's also returning with the one and only Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints. They're going to have a conversation on the future of the left. So we'll begin in a moment, but if everyone except Noam and Natalie can just turn off their camera. And I'll tag Natalie in a moment, and she'll be softly leading the conversation with Noam. And they'll be in conversation for about 40 minutes. Then Natalie will take me back in, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A, 60 minutes in total. Hopefully we'll get about one or two questions in. So Noam, Natalie, welcome back to the Stoa. And Natalie, I'll take you in. Oh, you're on mute. Both of you are on mute.
Are we good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me back. And Professor Chomsky, it's nice to meet you. So our topic is the future of the left. So I guess for the last year, I feel like I have been in a lot of arguments with other leftists about the 2020 election. And especially with people I know who are in their 20s, their awakening to politics was Bernie Sanders and the Sanders movement. And a lot of them were very deeply frustrated by the fact that Biden was the Democratic nominee. So to the extent that they didn't want to vote for him. And I was always arguing, oh, no, we have to vote against Trump. Number one priority. But now that Biden has won, I guess there's part of me that has this nagging guilt. Like I was the one saying, oh, we got to do Biden. We got to do Biden. I promise I'm not going to check out and go to brunch if Biden wins. But now I find that I am a little bit more complacent without this malignant charlatan tweeting from the White House every day. So I guess so to me, the future of the left for the near future is like how to influence from the outside, for those of us who are not politicians, like how to influence the Democratic Party in a left-wing direction. Like, can this be done? I guess I feel like I want to be able to tell these very passionate, like 22-year-olds that like, yes, like it's good that Biden's in office and we have some chance to influence an administration like this. Professor Chomsky, do you think that that's, do you think that there's significant ways of doing that?
Oh, definitely. In fact, it's already been done. Should just make one comment about the election since you brought it up. In November 2020, there were two choices. One choice was to vote against Trump. The other choice was to help Trump win. Abstaining meant help Trump win. Helping Trump win meant consigning ourselves to 4 years in which the environment would probably be destroyed. We might reach tipping points from which there would be no escape, plus lots more. So basically, there was no choice. The only choice was to vote against Trump. Okay, that in our system, that means cast your vote for Biden. Okay, well, barely, just barely, Trump was defeated. Just a couple of tens of thousands of votes, it might have changed. Of course, he lost by 7 million votes, but in our radically defective democracy, votes have a secondary role. So anyhow, yes, Biden's now in. How to influence Biden? same way it's been done so far. Biden's programs are effective in many ways, but in some respects, they're the best that we have seen for a long time. His climate program, that's the most important thing, is because survival depends on it. It's not what I would like to see, but it's better than anything else that's been proposed. And that didn't get there by magic. That got there by hard work, by Sunrise Movement sitting in on congressional offices, getting support from AOC, who picked up Ed Markey in the Senate, supported them so they weren't kicked out. A moderately decent climate program was proposed. Now there's a much better one. It's actually by now a congressional resolution. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey have introduced a resolution which is right on target. It's a detailed, careful proposal, feasible for what must be done and can be done to avert disaster. It's pretty much the same as the International Energy Association and some of the most prominent and significant people who've worked on the details of how to deal with this, like my colleague Bob Pollan, who's the lead on this. So it's a very good resolution. Can it get from being a resolution to being legislation? Well, that depends on people like you. It got as far as it did because of quite a lot of activist pressure. If there's more activist pressure, it can move on. And the same is true on every other issue. So what we call the left, remember, is left by US standards. So Bernie Sanders, we regard as the left. You read the liberal press in the United States, the most liberal columnists, say Paul Krugman in the New York Times, they'll say his policies are very good, but they're probably too radical for the American people. I suppose you go across the ocean and read the world's leading business newspaper by no means left, Financial Times. Their associate editor, leading columnist, recently had a column in which she said, sort of as a quip, but not entirely, that if Bernie Sanders was running on the Conservative Party program in Germany, Christian Democrats, the Conservative Party, the right-wing party, he could be a candidate there because his programs are already accepted by the right wing in Germany. Now, what are his main programs? Universal medical care, free college tuition. Yeah, they have that everywhere. Germany has it, France has it, Brazil has it, Finland has it. You know, it's not a big deal. It's a conservative position. It's in the United States, it's far to the left. Well, it hasn't always been this way. You go back to, I should say that I can't help these days thinking about my own childhood, early 1930s, rather similar today in many ways. One way it was similar, and this has to do with the left programs. One way it was similar, that there was vast inequality, just like today. Labor movement had been crushed. There was a lot of anger, resentment, concern. Things were boiling over. There were two ways, this was happening all over the world. There were two ways out. One way out was fascism. That was picked in Germany. Another way out was social democracy. That was picked in the United States. The New Deal was basically what's now called social democracy. At that point, it wasn't. The United States was actually in many ways in the lead in developing social democratic programs, which were picked up and extended in Europe after the Second World War. Well, it's kind of where we are now. We're not facing fascism in the 1930s sense, but something unpleasantly like it, at least in symptoms. We have the option of social democracy, something like the New Deal. Going back to Biden, his programs have a kind of New Deal flavor. The jobs program could have been a New Deal program. CARES program, to a certain extent, could have been. The environmental programs, of course, weren't considered in the 30s, but they're the kind of programs that could have been part of the New Deal. So there's some similarity. Very much like the 30s, he's running into an iron wall of opposition. Total. Republican Party won't permit any of it. The Supreme Court is very reactionary, struck down all of Roosevelt's initiatives until something happened. The labor movement revived. It had been virtually destroyed, mostly by violence, even worse than today. Began to revive, CIO organizing, militant labor actions, a lot of political groups, lots of popular organization. Got to the point where labor was actually getting as far as sit-down strikes. It's around the mid-30s. That sends real fear into the mainstream establishment. Sit-down strike is just one step before saying, we don't need you. We can run this thing by ourselves, get lost. Okay? At that point, I'm simplifying, but it's kind of what happened. At that point, the reactionary court shifted, began to permit New Deal measures. The business world reluctantly began to accommodate to the Wagner Act, labor organizing, New Deal measures, and so on. And you got the rudiments of a social democratic framework, which lasted pretty much until the reversal in the late 70s and the early 80s, the business offensive, which has for 40 years been working hard to roll back all the progress. That's the neoliberal period. Well, we're back to something similar. So what's the future of the left? Depends again on what people like you will do. Just as in the mid-30s, early 30s, depended on what your counterparts did at the time. They became engaged, committed, worked on it. It changed.
Yeah, there's sometimes this sense of self-defeating pessimism, I guess, that a lot of people have, that things are so bad, they've never been this bad. But it's not true, is it? It's better now than it was. I mean,
it's far better than it was in the 30s.
Or in the 60s.
Depression in the 30s was far worse than what we see today, incomparably. Not only that, but the country's made a lot of progress since. We shouldn't overlook that. The activism of the 1960s, its aftermath, really civilized the country in many ways. Things that we take that were considered normal at that time are unspeakable today. I mean, the 1960s, right through the 1960s. Right now, there's a housing crisis, serious housing crisis. What should happen is what happened in the 1930s. Federal government got involved in affordable public housing, but in a manner which went right through the 1960s and would be considered absolutely intolerable today. It had to be segregated. Public housing funded by the federal government had to block African Americans. that went on right through the 1960s. That wouldn't happen today. We've come forward in that respect, not by magic, by plenty of hard, difficult, dangerous work that pushed us beyond that. And the same is true in many other respects. Women's rights barely existed in the 1960s. Now a lot has changed. Same in other things. So we're in a much better situation now than we were in the 30s, and the conditions are nowhere near as awful as they were then. At that time, fascism meant real fascism. That meant brown shirts marching through the streets, meant concentration camps, meant powerful state run by a totalitarian party, which was so powerful it even controlled the business world. We have almost the opposite, the business world mostly controlling the government. I mean, there are similarities, but we shouldn't overdo it. And the main similarity is that popular activism and engagement can make the difference between a move towards a kind of proto-fascism, and for which we see the symptoms, and a move towards authentic social democracy, maybe beyond.
Yeah, I think sometimes it seems to me that it's easier to make progress in the kind of like what's called identity politics areas of feminism, gay rights, trans rights, because so much work can be done just through consciousness raising. I mean, I guess I don't really like to claim the valor of an activist when I'm really more of an entertainer with a conscience, but I feel that as someone who has, I have a YouTube channel, like that millions of people watch, you can really kind of shift things just by talking, because you can put the idea in people's head of accepting groups of people who haven't been previously accepted, and that alone, it goes a significant way towards changing the situation. I guess what seems more difficult to me is the move towards social democracy, where you have, I guess it feels harder to break through the power of corporate money and politics. And it seems less, to me anyway, like it's possible through sheer consciousness raising or activism. Like it's possible to, I think to a lot of people, it seems like there's this, I don't know, like unbreakable wall of money and politics that it's hard to get through with these with anything so sort of spiritual, idealistic, I guess, as activism, consciousness raising, protest movements.
The same in the 1930s.
Yeah.
There was an unbreakable wall of money and politics and corporate power, but it was broken. And it's been broken many times since. The reasons we've moved, it's not just consciousness raising. Consciousness raising leads to action. There are changes. The expansion of civil rights is not anywhere near as far as it should be, but it's real. It's dramatically different. Same with women's rights, same with gay rights, same with even inroads in control of the corporate sector. So for example, now there are the beginnings of worker-owned enterprises, which are to some extent flourishing, collectives, so on. That's all real. It's not just consciousness raising. So yes, we have to, it begins with changing people's beliefs and understanding, but then it turns into action. So let's go back to the most critical issue, that resolution I mentioned in Congress, the AOC Markey resolution. Well, that can be pushed to legislation, just as the New Deal measures were pushed to legislation. Right now, Supreme Court, reactionary court, might block it, just as the court blocked all the New Deal measures through the early 30s. But something changed. Popular power changed, and the court reluctantly went along. even the threat, Roosevelt's threat to pack the court, add justices, that alone changed the decisions of the court markedly. They could see the writing on the wall. Can't get away with it anymore. Okay, that's how things change. You're always going to be engaged in class war against a bitter enemy. The business classes are basically vulgar Marxist, deeply committed to unremitting class war. But there's a limit to what they can get away with, because they don't actually have the power when it finally comes to push and shove. Power is in the hands of the population if they exercise it. Okay, but then you have to exercise it. That means persuasion, education, organization, action, and persistent activism, and it leads to changes.
I think maybe
we don't know.
I think maybe an obstacle for a lot of people in terms of consciousness of our collective power is that it's sometimes difficult to see the long-term, power of these incremental changes. So I think that especially when I have conversations with undergraduates and people that age, it's like they you start with a very philosophical approach to politics, and so that tends to produce like a kind of utopian thing. Oh, what should society look like? And then anything that's not producing that is seen as some kind of like morally corrupting compromise. And I guess this is, I find I'm often in this argument with people where it's like they're using their philosophical conception. So like you say, we don't have like there's not really a socialist politician of any significant like influence in the United States. We call the New Deal, basically we call that socialism now. So I think some people become cynical that well, this isn't real socialism, so it's not worth doing. And like, like they're sort of holding out for, I don't know, some kind of revolutionary moment when suddenly everything is going to be good. But I don't know. I don't particularly think that's how it works.
How the world works.
Yeah.
Remember, there is one difference today and in the 1930s. There were, at the time in the 1930s, left political parties which had a long tradition, had activists working in them. They weren't overwhelmed by illusions about instant gratification. They knew it's hard, long-term work, which will suffer regression. You make progress, you keep working. If things go bad, you work harder, but it's not going to be something you're going to get by snapping your fingers. So let's take a lot of young people's, you know better than I do, but I can see it, attitudes towards the Sanders campaign. It's widely described as a failure. It was a smashing success, an unbelievable success. Sanders broke with over a century of American political history, a century in which electability was pretty much determined simply by funding. This goes back to the late 19th century. You ask Mark Hanna, the great campaign organizer of the late 19th century, was asked once, what do you need to run a successful campaign? And he said, two things. The first one is money, and I've forgotten what the second one is. Well, that's the way American political history has been. Sanders broke with that. No corporate funding, no wealthy funding, media totally against him. He not only practically won, probably would have won if it hadn't been for Democratic Party machinations, but also has a very influential position. Right now, his position in Congress is quite influential. He plays a big role. Other people came in on the Sanders wave, like Ocasio-Cortez
Yeah.
and others, and are having a big effect.
Yeah, I'll say for my own part,
Those are successes. That's not failure. That's
yeah,
tremendous success. Okay, now you go on and build from there.
I mean, the Sanders campaign transformed my own imagination of what is possible. I guess previously I had thought, socialism is a permanent dirty word in this country. It's just not a pragmatic possibility. But I do think that just the visibility of this and the fact that he was able to build a movement, it does kind of change it changes people's capacity to imagine what's possible in the future. So I think that's pretty significant.
Just go back 50 years, 1960s. One of the great moments of popular activism in the 1960s of the left, SDS, was when, must have been around 1968 or 69, the president of SDS, Paul Potter, gave a presidential address. It was a great guy, I should say, a wonderful guy. And in the presidential address of the SDS, the most left-wing organization, he, after a long build-up, he said, "It's come time to name the system." And he said the word capitalism, and there was a silence. Wow, somebody actually said the word. Okay, that's what it was like in the 1960s. You couldn't, it's not socialism. You couldn't say the word capitalism.
Yeah, that's very different.
Left
Yeah.
wing. Okay, we've come a long way. It's true that the word, it's an interesting fact about the United States, that it's the only country I know of outside of total totalitarian dictatorships where socialism is considered a four-letter word.
Yeah.
Every other country, socialism is, you say you're a socialist, like saying you're a Democrat. It's nothing, no. Yeah, so you're a socialist, so what? Well, that's a breakthrough. The 1960s, you couldn't say the word capitalism. Now you can. And you can even say the word socialism, social democracy, and not just say it, but implement some of the policies. Okay, those are changes. That's how things happen. And it's not just the words, it's the actions. And they're right on the table. Like take the climate issue is by far the most important one, but there's very serious problems in this country. There's tens of millions of people who don't have food on the table. There are people who are being thrown out in the streets because there's no affordable housing. Well, there are programs that could deal with those things. Actually, Biden's programs have a kind of New Deal flavor. If they could get through, it would be, they'd make a big dent in these problems. A lot of people would be a lot better off. Wouldn't be a revolution, but we're not going to have a revolution tomorrow.
Yeah.
It would be a major change in people's lives. It would set the stage for going on. Now, what's happening with those programs? Well, 100% Republican opposition. We see it in Washington every time we open our eyes. Just a couple of days ago, Biden was criticized sharply, even in the liberal press, for making a terrible mistake. What was the mistake? He stood up and said, "I'll accept the very limited stimulus program that the Republicans have permitted, but I'm going to continue to press for the broader one." Terrible mistake. Everyone came down on him hard. Of course, McConnell and the rest of the Republicans denounced him for backing off on a promise, but even the liberal press condemned him. How can you say a thing like that? How can you be minimally decent? Okay, well, you have to create an environment in which he's not blamed for that, but he's supported for it. Yes, he should press to try to get the rest of the program through. The Republicans have a red line. They made it very clear. The red line is you cannot do anything which in any way harms the ultra ultra wealth and corporate power. They made that very explicit. The red line is you can't touch to pay for these things. You can't touch the Trump tax scam, which was a huge giveaway. The one legislative program under Trump was a huge giveaway to the very rich and the corporate sector. The tax bill of 2017 harmed everyone else. And you can't touch that. That was made explicit. I'm not reading anything into what they said. That's the red line. Well, should we accept that? Of course not.
What do you think about, it seems that a significant obstacle to, I mean, what to do about the Republican Party, I guess part of the future of the left is the future of the right. It seems like the future of the right is Trumpism. And that, I don't know, the way I see that, it's like there's 40% of this country that has kind of checked out of public rationality itself. And so far as they're not really doing like reasoning in any conventional sense. Like when you have something like QAnon and the kind of free associative paranoia of Satanist cabals, of pedophiles running, it's like, there's like, it undercuts the ability to communicate with people what you're even trying to say, because there's like a attack on what, you know, the normal concept of what reality is. And so I suppose, I mean, some of these people simply have to be ignored, I guess, because when you can't, you know, obviously not everyone's, you're never going to have everyone agree, but I guess when you have like an obstructionist Republican Party, like, I don't know, it's just kind of alarming to me how many people are still supporting this despite.
You work on it.
Yeah.
So for example, what you say is true. It's about 40% of the population.
Mm.
However, if you look a little bit more closely, it's age related. If you look at younger Republicans, it's by no means that at an extreme. Not great, but they're more open to discussion and
Viable, yeah.
thinking about these issues. Well, that's where you work. Turn the Republican Party. It's not fixed. There are many people who vote for Trump who voted for Obama. Okay, their genes haven't changed. Their picture of the world and what's possible has changed. There's one of the many reasons why the Republicans are dead set against allowing any progressive legislation to go through, is that if it does, it's going to peel off a large part of their voting base. If the Democrats succeed in putting through programs that alleviate the conditions, which are very harsh for much of the population, there goes the voting base. So they have a very strong reason to make the country ungovernable, not just trying, of course, the main goal just is coming back into power. But one way to ensure that is to make sure that none of the legislation and actions that would improve people's lives ever get through. Okay, got to work on it, got to make people understand that, and that can happen. If you want to think about the 1930s again, you had the same kind of ultra-right groups. There were, in fact, 1932 33 came pretty close to a coup to overthrow the government. It was broken up by the great Smedley Butler, Marine commander, who intervened and blocked the coup. That was a real coup attempt, not January 6th. There were anti-Semitic and fascist groups were all over the place, not just in the United States, but in England and elsewhere. In fact, take Germany. Bear in mind that Germany in the 1920s was the absolute peak of Western civilization. The sciences and the arts, literature was regarded as a model of democracy. That was Germany. Had a huge labor movement. One of the reasons the Nazis were able to come in is that the left was split. The Stalinist line at the time, followed religiously by the KPD, the Communist Party, was that the Social Democrats, counterpart to the Bidenites, were worse than Hitler. They were social fascists. Trotsky, who was trying to urge the two parts of the left, the Social Democrats and the Communists, trying to urge them to unite, was bitterly condemned by the Communists as one of the worst figures in history, because he was willing to cooperate with the social fascists, who were worse than the Nazis. Okay, I think you can find counterparts to that in the left today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So
counterparts.
don't let the left be split. Don't let the coalition get broken up in that way, right? I guess it reminds me of what happened, what I saw happening in 2016, where when you had like Trumpism first showing up, and before Trump was even running on the internet, I guess I was kind of tracking what to me was like this disturbing like emergence of like proto-fascist like leanings of, you know, anti-Semitism and like race science and this kind of thing. And they were able to recruit basically by targeting dissatisfaction with, you know, what what some people would say as like extreme leftist activism, right? So they would male resentment of feminism, for example. That's a point where they could get in and bring people on over to their side. Or white people sort of not understanding the point of Black Lives Matter. That's a point you can bring people over by appealing to that. So to me, I guess as a persuasive challenge, it was all about like, how do we stop again, and it is mostly young people, like you say. That's when people tend to be more pliable about their beliefs, and you can kind of people who are sort of starting to flirt with right-wing ideology, you can intervene at that moment. I guess that's to me sort of what I've tended to want to focus on is to notice how the far right's rhetoric is targeting the kind of conflict between like leftists and liberals and centrists, and is able to use that to get power.
Well, that's their job.
Yeah.
Their job is to try to cause conflict and antagonisms inside the left, obviously. The job of the left is to do the same to them. Strip off those parts of the far right which are, in fact, which have real grievances, which can be addressed, dealt with, and bring them around to understand that there are ways to deal with these issues. Bring them around to understand that destruction of the environment is not a joke. It's going to destroy their lives, their children's lives. There won't be anything around. Okay, they can come to understand that. And actually, among younger Republicans, there's more appreciation of facts like that. It's very much like any other issue. Let's take the Vietnam War. By the late 1960s, there was a substantial anti-war movement. Didn't come about by nothing. In the early 60s, when Kennedy sharply escalated the war, it was almost impossible to talk about it. I was giving talks in a church with half a dozen people. Most of them wanted to kill you. We couldn't have in Boston, where I lived, the most liberal city in the country. We couldn't even have public meetings against the war until about late 66, 67, because they'd be broken up by students, by pro-war students. It takes work, okay? It doesn't just happen by itself. Same with civil rights. People in the, SNCC workers in the South faced extreme hostility all over. Actually, when Martin Luther King moved his activities to the North, began opposing racism in the North, working for a poor people's movement, he was bitterly attacked by the liberal community and practically destroyed even before he was assassinated. Well, takes work. Kinds of things he was talking about then, you can talk about now. I mean, the Black Lives Matter has way more support, public support, than King had at the peak of his popularity. It's because things have changed.
Well, it seems like a significant advantage is with the way that information is disseminated on the internet. It's, at the moment at least, it's much more difficult for them to crack down on it. So there is kind of a genuine freedom of information, which of course can also, you know, produce conspiracy theories and misinformation, and it can be misused in ways too. But I think free speech is not negligible in terms of it at least allows you to, it gives you an opportunity to say what needs to be said.
There are plenty of opportunities. There's lots of problems, lots of difficulties. Nothing's going to be easy. It's been harder before, and people didn't give up. They went ahead, worked courageously, effectively, and there have been changes. Not great, it's not wonderful, plenty of rotten things. But if you compare it to what it was a couple decades ago, it's a big improvement.
Yeah, and that's as good, that's kind of as good as you can do.
So I'll jump in now. Thank you, Natalie and Noam. We have a bunch of questions in the chat. Is there any hard stop for either Noam or Natalie? We can go a little bit above the hour if some of the questions.
It's fine with me.
All right, so I'll take in. Oh, everyone, let there be light in the Stoa. You can turn on your camera now, and I will probably squeeze in one or two questions. So Evan, you're up first.
All right, thank you. Let me find my question real quick. My question is, so how can the left become more effective in actual policymaking in the face of sustained obstructionism in Congress? Even such energetic new figures as AOC are not consistently operating to take advantage of the almost certainly temporary democratic control of government. When the right is in power, on the other hand, they don't seem to generally pursue the mirage of bipartisan agreement on their signature legislative initiatives, but the left seems content to let the right torpedo meaningful reform on the most important topics, say climate change and voting rights, in the name of some dated ideal of bipartisanism. So how can those of us who care about the world convince our representatives to play hardball in implementing policy when we have the opportunity to do so?
How do we deal with the, I'm not sure I totally understand, how do we deal with the rigid opposition and move towards some sort of bipartisanship?
Well, no, my question is specifically that when the left is in power, the ideal of bipartisanship they seem to maintain. And so they therefore fail to get much done in the face of obstructionism.
They go low, we go high, right? That's
right. So my question is, if you are a leftist and you want your representatives to pass legislation, even if it's not bipartisan, what would your suggestions be to get that sort of thing done?
If the left happens to have control over Congress, should it refuse to pass legislation if it's not bipartisan? I don't see why. If you can get it through, get it through. I mean, I think, you know, when you talk about bipartisanship, remember that the Republican Party is no longer a normal political party. You go back 20 or 30 years, the Republican Party was a political party. My dog doesn't agree, but I'll go ahead anyway. I mean, in the past, I've voted for Republicans during the 1960s when I was down at civil rights demonstrations in the South and trying to get some government federal support to try to prevent the state troopers, say in Mississippi, for just beating everyone bloody. I called a Republican representative because he was the one who was most likely to give some help. Republicans were a political party at the time. In fact, you go back to Eisenhower, a lot of what he says sounds like Bernie Sanders. His strong and pro-union statements are about as strong as anything Sanders ever said. In those days, Republicans were a legitimate political party. That's changed in the last 10 or 20 years. They're not a party. Actually, even mainstream commentators describe them as a radical insurgency that's abandoned parliamentary politics. That's started under Gingrich, picked up under Hastert. It's just become outlandish under McConnell. When Obama came in, McConnell said straight out, almost in these words, our goal is to make sure that he cannot accomplish anything. Okay? That's saying we abandon parliamentary politics. We're not a political party. We are a party that represents the super rich and the corporate system, and we'll do anything to gain power, period.
Okay. I do think that Democrats have kind of begun to notice this, like, especially after Trump and after January 6th. Like, it's not like in the Obama administration where there was, I don't know, there was a sense almost that Obama would allow himself to be obstructed. I feel that is kind of, to some extent, come to a stop.
McConnell and Trump really put the finishing touches on it. But it's been going on for quite a while in the Republican Party, in many ways, back to Nixon's Southern strategy, but picked up in the 90s and this millennium. But that doesn't mean it's permanent. There are even legislators in the Republican Party who are amenable to some kind of discussion. Lisa Murkowski, occasionally Susan Collins, but the main thing to do is just to change the party, turn it back to a political party. And younger people can do that, turn the Republicans back to a normal political party. I won't like their policies, but at least they'll be, within the framework of parliamentary politics. It's not like the Nazis, who you couldn't possibly bring in. It was impossible, They're not like that.
Do you have a follow-up, Evan?
So yeah, I guess my quick follow-up is specifically focused on the Democratic side of this, because it seems that still to this day, the Democrats are not doing things like, for example, getting rid of the filibuster that would allow them to pass a more a better policy agenda, especially for things like climate change, where the clock is ticking. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to convince the Democrats to play more hardball.
Try to convince them. There's no magic keys. You just work to try to convince them. Yeah, they ought to. How do you convince Joe Manchin and Karen Sinema to go along with getting rid of the filibuster? Okay, it's hard. It's not so simple, because if there was a move to get rid of the filibuster, McConnell has possible ways of reacting. He could use maneuvers to virtually close down the Senate. There are techniques that can be used if you're a real wrecker, you want to destroy the country, which he would do to keep power. There are methods that could be used simply to close down Congress, Senate at least, and then means nothing would pass. So it's a difficult job. I read left commentators these days, actually friends, who are criticizing, sharply condemning Biden because he didn't get Medicare for all through, and he didn't get a minimum wage, and he doesn't end the filibuster. Okay, how? How do you do it? Well, not by sitting at your desk and sending off Twitter tweets. That doesn't work. So yes, he didn't do it, and there's absolutely no way he could do it. So get to work and help create the conditions in which it can be done. That's the answer. It's always the answer.
All right. Let's take in the next question. Benita Roy, you had a question.
Hi.
You're on mute, Benita.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, greatly appreciating your appearances. And I'm going to frame this question in terms of Professor Chomsky's work, but I would also like very much to hear Natalie's take on it, because I've seen a lot of your philosophical entertainment things that go deep and broaden and like go places where no one has gone before. So yeah, I'm trying to do those two things at the same time. So Professor Chomsky, I grew up reading your books, and I have a fan on. Is it too loud? That's okay. Okay. And I think the first book I read was Manufacturing Consent. And in that book, you were problematizing the political machinations of the United States and the media and the think tanks. And interestingly, Consilience Project, run by Daniel Schmattenberger, he's been on the Stoa, they just released an article on, you know, how public persuasion happens, what are the perverse incentives, how this whole thing happens. And what's interesting to me is that the right is developing a critique of the left about the hegemonic manufacturing of consent in the media. And my question is manufacturing consent problematic across all content, or only if it's not the content, if it's not left content or the content you believe in?
The right wing has always argued that the left is, that the media are way to the left, even communist, like the end of the Vietnam War, for example. Freedom House, which is usually considered liberal, launched a huge attack against the media for being so unpatriotic that they lost the war. In fact, if you take a look at the book Manufacturing Consent, there's a part of it that not many people read. The last roughly quarter of it is a defense of the media against the attack from Freedom House. Freedom House launched a huge attack saying the reason we lost the Vietnam War, as they put it, is because the reporters on the scene were so passionately pro-communist, anti-American, unpatriotic, that they were stabbing us in the back. And see, we have a long review of that in which we show that they're just lying through their teeth. All the evidence that they produced is exactly the opposite. It's one of the most amazing examples of fanatic lying that I've ever seen. You can read it and see it. That's liberals, incidentally. But yes, they were attacking the media as being far to the left. If you go to the right, it's much more. Go back to the 1950s, McCarthyism and so on. Everybody in the media is a communist. So sure, the right wing will always claim that the media are ultra-left elites who are trying to destroy the country. That's part of their shtick, you know, so they're going to do that. It's ridiculous, of course, but so the response is, okay, let's tell the truth about it. Let's tell the truth. In fact, in our defense of the media against Freedom House, what we pointed out was the reporters were honorable, courageous, telling the truth about what they saw, but doing it within a framework of support for the ruling doctrines. They were saying the US troops are doing all these horrible things, but that's a deviation from Americanism. It's a deviation from what we are. It's undermining our long-term commitment to democracy and freedom. Okay, that's the propaganda line. So they were doing honest work within a framework of total conformity to the propaganda line. Well, That's the kind of critical analysis you want to do when you look at the media. So sure, the right is going to claim everything is run by the left-wing elites. We don't have a chance to talk and so on. They claim that about the universities. Right now, we're in the midst of an interesting example of that. The right-wing hysteria about critical race theory. They haven't a clue what critical race theory is, and they don't care. It's just some demonic thing run by the radical left to make our kids, if they're white, feel that they're guilty of everything that ever happened. Does it matter? How do you respond? Telling the truth, exposing the truth. There's no other way.
It can kind of backfire, can't it, once they decide to appoint a villain like critical race theory, because now you have a bunch of people previously no idea what critical race theory is, looking up critical race theory. Well, that's an opportunity to step in and to present a different narrative about critical race theory that you may not have even had before.
Exactly. It's an opportunity to bring out what critical race theory really is and why we should take it seriously.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not an attack on your children in school. It's an effort to bring about an understanding of our actual history and the legacy that it has left. It's not just history, it has a legacy. I mean, what I said before about the racist housing programs, that has a legacy. That's a large part of the reason for the vast wealth disparity between blacks and whites. White workers could get a house in the 1950s and 60s. Black workers couldn't. That has an impact on all the racist, ugly, disgraceful racist history, has a major impact on today. Same is true of the extermination of the indigenous population. Again, go back to the 60s and see how far we've come. In the 1960s, the leading left liberal anthropologists were writing that when the English colonists came, there was nobody here, just a bunch of hunter-gatherers straggling around, maybe 1 million of them. They were off by about 80 million. It was an attack that led to extermination and expulsion on an incomparable scale. All of that was unknown in the 1960s. Finally broke through. Now we know something about it. We can do something about the legacy that it left. Those are changes, major changes. Again, took place the same way, by hard, unremitting work. Nothing happens easily against extreme antagonism, just the kind you're seeing now. When the New York Times ran the 1619 series, it was a real breakthrough. That would have been impossible a couple of years earlier, but there was extreme backlash from the right. The backlash was to ban it from being used. Literally ban it. We can't know those things. But even if you look at liberal scholars started carping about, this footnote was wrong and should have been a little different and so on. There was a backlash across the board. You don't want to expose all that stuff. Well, it did reach a lot of people. It's part of the changes that led to the extraordinary uprising after the George Floyd assassination. Well, things change, but it takes work.
Yeah, if your original question was about, well, yes, does the media always have some kind of bias? Well, obviously it does. I think that part of the fight about, part of the fight is about what the media says. What should the bias be? Should it be a bias? I mean, pro-democracy is a kind of bias, right? But I think that we would argue that that's the bias that that journalism ought to have, a bias for democracy against fascism, right? And so part of the fight is not just, you know, like the notion that there's like, oh, just totally objective, totally neutral feed of information could be curated without any kind of political implications. Obviously, that's, you know, that could not exist. So, you know, yeah, so of course the right-wing line about how, oh, the, you know, communist news network and the you know, the notion that there's some kind of far left agenda in mainstream American journalism is not true. But and there is some kind of agenda, there always will be. So I don't think that in and of itself is a problem.
I didn't entirely grasp what you were saying.
Oh, I just thought the original question asker was asking like about whether, you know, consent is manufactured, whether it's always manufactured by, I guess, a media that sets the terms of a conversation.
Well, I mean, it's true that the media are institutions which are, to a significant extent, bound by the nature of their institutional structure. They are major corporations. They're selling a product, namely readers or watchers, to other corporations, advertisers. So you've got major corporations selling people like you to other corporations. They're closely linked to government, flow up and back from government. They're embedded very much in the general hegemonic culture, which is in the universities and intellectual culture altogether, about American innocence, nobility, and so on. So that's the framework in which work goes on. That doesn't mean they don't do good reporting. They do. First thing I do in the morning is read the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. That's where you get the information. You have to compensate for the inherent distortions that are part of the nature of the institutions. And they change. You see things in the New York Times today that would have been inconceivable a couple of years ago, like the 1619 Project and plenty more. There are columnists in the New York Times today who could never have been admitted years ago. Okay, that's part of the change that's taken place in the general culture as the result of a lot of hard work. Affects the institutions as well. That's the way you make progress. No other way has ever been discovered. Afraid I'm going to have to leave. I've got another interview coming.
So yeah, we'll close out here. Thank you, Noam, if you have to head out. Any closing thoughts for either Noam or Natalie before we close?
From us or for us?
From you both.
Well, I think this. I think it's very helpful to have this conversation about optimism for me, because I feel like that's something that a lot of people do not have. That at least, I don't know, maybe I'm spending time in the wrong parts of the left, too much time on social media or something. Well, obviously that's the case, but I find that, yeah, it's just like a relief to hear you say these things, because I think sometimes I feel crazy when I say that. No, it's actually good when you know, Democrats are able to pass some reforms, and it's actually good. It's not that everything's bad because it's not communism yet. Like, I don't know. I find that to be such an obstacle in terms of like leftist spaces that I end up inside, is the sense that nothing's ever good enough. Nothing ever gets better. Everything is doomed. Like, I don't know. I find that to be the height of self-sabotage, and I feel that, you know, it's been refreshing to have a conversation that's not about that.
Any closing thoughts on your end, Noam, before you leave?
I'm happy to leave things as they are.
Beautiful. If you have to leave right now, Noam, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa. It's greatly appreciated having you here again. And I'll make some.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank
Got to
you.
go off to the next.
Natalie, do you have one more minute for some closing?
Do I?
Yeah.
Sure.
Because Natalie and I were talking about an interesting conversation that might happen at the Stoa. So those of you who know that Jordan Peterson was my therapist, and I'm inviting him to the Stoa soon, hopefully in conversation with Natalie. And Natalie agreed, and she suggested a really interesting topic. So perhaps, would you like to tease what that could be, Natalie?
Well, I'm making a video right now. I've just finished filming it. It's going to be uploaded as soon as I'm done editing. I've got 20 hours of raw footage. So how long can that take to edit? A couple of days. No, I think that, the video, it's about envy and resentment in human life, in politics, in social media, which turns out to be a very large topic. I didn't sort of anticipate when I was beginning that I was, oh, this is about 50% of human nature. Whoops. Yeah, I think that it's a very Jordan Peterson topic. And I think that, I guess I think I share like this because I'm also, reading Nietzsche. I'm sharing source material with Dr. Peterson, but I think that we reach different conclusions. So I guess, I don't know, it seems like a good topic to have a fight about.
Very cool. People are suggesting a drinking game at the Stoa when you two are in conversation on envy. So yeah, potentially look forward to that. And I'll make some closing announcements in a moment. But Natalie, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa again.
You're very welcome.
Great treat.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Natalie. So for closing, for upcoming events, Benita, do you want to plug your events coming up?
Sure. So I've been creating something called the Pop-Up School. It's actually a phrase taken from Zach Stein's book, Education in a Time Between Worlds. And this notion of pop-up schools coming and going, perhaps. So it's basically hosted from a Substack newsletter. And I've been writing on, the first series is called The Timeless Way of Being. And we're looking at embodiment, indigeneity, and a kind of neo-animism as a potential new framework for emerging culture. And that will eventually be a series of actual courses that people can sign up from. If you subscribe as a paid member, you get free access to the courses, but there's also ways to pay for individual courses. So the Pop-Up School Substack, go there, be a free subscriber, get free updates of how the thing unfolds. And yeah, it's an experiment in accelerating transformation at scale. Thanks.
Yeah, and I recommend checking anything Benita does. That's a July. She's going to have the event at the Stoa to kind of launch it July 5th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Then we have another event, a very own embodiment. I got to find a cool name, but Skylar Brown is going to have a coming home session, a path to embodiment. Skylar, are you still here?
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Hi, everyone. First of all, I am a subscriber to the Pop-Up School, so I'm really looking forward to that. And Bonnie has taught me a lot about embodiment, so all of it seems to be weaving. Yeah, it's July 21st at noon. It's a Wednesday at noon. We'll do an experience, like an experience of coming into the body, coming home to the body. I have some practices, and we'll talk also about trauma and what keeps us from feeling and receiving the wisdom of the body, and all of it just designed to help us be grounded through these crazy times and have more capacity for each other, for these conversations, for the persuasion we were talking about today. So I was just listening through that lens and thinking how it could be complementary to even the content you're bringing forward, Peter.
Beautiful. Thank you, Skylar. And that event is July 21st at 12 p.m. Eastern time. You go to the Stoa.ca, we got tons of events coming up. We have a wisdom gym. We're going to be having a lot more Patreon events, experiments of collective intelligence, Stoic circling, embodiment exercise, a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, and this was a Patreon event. So thank you everyone for supporting the Stoa. And yeah,